Right, I see a message, encouraging message about our video. So we have, once again, good afternoon. It's been an amazing day and a half so far, really stimulating presentations and discussions, and I'm sure that this session is going to continue along that vein. So we have 3 presentations scheduled, and we're going to start with a video presentation which I'm assuming is our Swahiliport presentation on Swahili architecture, fusion of the traditional and modernity, which is, as I said, it's a video presentation. It has been developed by Fatma Twahir, who I don't think is present, so the video will speak.
Hello.
Hi, yes.
Yeah. So Fatma is not around. I'll get to a video on her behalf. Sorry.
Lovely. Do you want to? I'm going to welcome you and say, do you want to add a few words of introduction, just perhaps to tell us a little bit about Swahiliport before we go into the video? I know it's been mentioned a couple of times, but perhaps you could just give us a minute or background.
That is very fun. I do have a formal presentation about Swahiliport. Just 1-2 minutes, take you through what Swahiliport is. So that's very fine.
Yeah, that would be in the video after that, right?
All right, sure, that's very fine.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll deal with it that way. And while you're just, collecting yourself, we're going to have the presentation by Naomi and Deirdre on urban heritage for transformative futures, architecture in heritage and belonging in Cape Town will be the last presentation on request. So I'm going to ask Rim if you're happy to do your presentation on expression of liberation movements through modern architecture in Africa, second after the video. Is that in order? I don't see if Rim is with us actually. Or maybe, I think we'll just play it by ear. And these things sometimes take a while to sort themselves out. So Arafat, when you're ready, over to you. Presumably you'll share screen with us. You're on mute, by the way. Arafat, are you there? Are you with us?
Oh yes, Laura, I am there. So I'm meant to present, right? Sorry for that.
Yes, sorry, we're on mute. So I just wondered if you'd have a comment. If you could go ahead with your short presentation, and then our tech team will run the video as well for us.
All right, so that's fine. So this is a presentation about Swahiliport.
Yes.
Absolutely. All right. Just give me a second. Let me get to share my screen if you don't mind. All right. I hope you can see my screen. Let me turn my video.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Full screen.
Great.
And we can see you too. Welcome.
All right. Sorry for that. So yeah, my name is Arafat Mu. I do work at Swahiliport Hub Foundation as in the Department of Technology. And this is, in a nutshell, this is what Swahiliport is. So Swahiliport, all right, need to move. This is really what I'm gonna try to brush through very, very fast. I'll get to skip some sections. So it's a community space that nurtures youth talents and skills in the fields of technology, creative and arts, as well as heritage. It was founded in the year 2016 by Mahmoud Noor in partnership with the National Museums of Kenya, SICOM, ICT Authority, as well as Cisco Systems. And when it was founded in 2016, it was started with a major focus on technology, tech innovation. But then since majority of the youths in Mombasa, also coast region of Kenya, are into creative and arts, so he opted to open it up to the wider community of creatives. And now, soon after founding in Swahiliport in 2016, they opened it up to the creatives, and now the numbers exploded because majority of the youths in Mombasa are interested in creative and arts. So what the name Swahiliport represents is Swahili to represent the Swahili culture of coast region in Kenya. Then port to represent a container that brings various youths together. So that is basically Swahiliport. It's a place that brings various youths along the coastal region of Kenya. So our mission is to enable the community to develop themselves, of which majority are youth. So in terms of our impact, so we do run 23 programs across tech, creative, and arts, as well as programs. Last year, we had 40,000 individuals taking part in our events, majority of which did so virtually. And also majority of those whom we serve are youths between the ages of 21 to 30, and also majority are males, and also 80% of our community members and participants on an annual basis are into creative and arts. So we've also won several awards for in particular outstanding community service. These are awards that are hosted annually by the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So we are the undisputed leaders when it comes to in Mombasa. How we get to fulfill our mission of enabling the community to develop themselves is part one. It's through the physical space where we do get to host events, to meet, network, and also get to co-work from, and also the various programs that we run all throughout the course of the year. So in terms of the physical space, I'll brush through that. So this is the community shade. So this is literally like the physical space at Swahiliport. We do have that is the community space. There is the co-working space. This is the boardroom where I'm actually taking this call from. This is the patio. We have the hall, and actually the images that you see on this is now on my right are images from the MoHoA, Modern Heritage of Africa workshop we hosted in July, early July. And that is the amphitheater that is currently undergoing landscaping thanks to the support from the National Museums of Kenya, as well as Ministry of Culture, Heritage, and Sports. Yeah, actually, physical space is one of our biggest concerns. So plans are currently underway to be able to expand the physical space so we can be able to broaden our impact. I will try to skip programs in technology since it's really quite broad, but whoever is interested, I'll get to my email in the chat. You can reach out to me so I can share this presentation. But for the sake of this, I'll go into programs in creative and arts. So we do have Pwani Got Talents. This is a talent showcase for youths who are interested in, this is a talent showcase and competition for performing artists, comedians, musicians, dancers, poets, spoken word artists. It's usually held every year on an annual basis at the end of Pwani Innovation Week. And usually the winner walks away with a cash award of $2,000 and also an opportunity for mentorship and guidance to be able to scale their we do also have a Friday poetry. This is where we get to entertain. This is where we get to entertain and also educate the community using poetry as the medium. Actually, one of the biggest poets that we have at Swahiliport is actually currently presenting in the other breakout session on orality, performing arts, right, from Swahiliport. So the first edition that we had of this year was Hatua, which was focused on the girl child. Last edition was known as Manani, was focused on the boy child. But for the Hatua edition in particular, the entry ticket was a pack of sanitary pads, right? So as a result of that, we came up with what is known as the Swahiliport Pad Bank. And this is a repository of sanitary pads. So Swahiliport is also, we do have sanitary pads that we keep. So any girl who is in urgent need of a sanitary pad can go to Swahiliport, pick up a sanitary pad and utilize it at zero cost. Then Theatre Zone, this is a group of actors and also a live stage performers works out from Swahiliport. So this year, because of restrictions around in-person gatherings, so they couldn't have their live stage performance. As a result, they opted to turn their live stage performance into a movie known as It's My Turn to Eat, that is currently in the final stage of production. Then there is All Creatives Affair. This is where we get to invite professionals and also experts in the creative and arts field to come and share words of wisdom and provide guidance to the up and coming artists. Then there's the Swahiliport Cinemax. This is where we get showcase movies from the Kenyan film to be able to inspire up and coming filmmakers. Happy hour, this is a form of entertainment. You know, it so happens that many times there's a lot going on. We all meet deadlines or trying to really try to make things meet. So during happy hour, we have that 1 hour where like there's literally no work at the entire space. So everything comes to a standstill, and then we get to in these competitive games as a way of our bonding and also getting to relax our. It's also one way in which we get to aspects around, say, mental health. And then focus to discussions. These are mostly ways of discussing. These are mostly brainstorming sessions around social challenges, around in particular aspects relating to gender-based violence, teenage pregnancies, and also drug abuse. And then we have Beauty in the Streets. This is where we get to identify talent from the street. So like these are kids who stay on the streets, we identify them and we provide them with mentorship and guidance. And actually at Swahiliport, we have 2 gentlemen who are actually picked up from the street. So at the moment they do serve in the administration department. Then every Saturday, we do host what is known as Costo. This is in partnership with every Sunday, we do host what is known as Costo in partnership with the Sauti ya Pwani Radio. It's a radio station based here in Mombasa, Coast Region, where we not only get to entertain, but also get to educate the audience, also still using poetry and also spoken word as media. So every Sunday you can log into our Facebook page so that you can be able to listen in live. And actually if you can see my cursor, this gentleman here, his name is known as Malenga 001. He's the one that I was referring to. He's actually currently presenting in the other breakout session. He has a presentation on Tarab.
And then I'm sorry to interrupt you. Our tech team has asked how long you'll be with the presentation because they have to play the video to replay it somewhere else. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, all right. So the video is actually 9 minutes. So maybe in the next 1 minute, I'll be done with this.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize for interrupting.
Okay, it's very, very fine, Laura. Thank you very much for that. So we are very, very glad and host at the Modern Heritage of Africa workshop that was in July in partnership with the National Museum and also other international bodies and organizations. For example, at the moment we're having this international symposium on MoHoA being hosted by University of Cape Town. They also joined us in the same. So we're familiar with the conversation, but then for our case outcome after hosting that workshop, we are working on what is known as the MoHoA story, right? Sort of like documenting this aspect of modern heritage using Swahili culture as a case study. So coming up with such a documentary. And also the second is that we're working on a MoHoA Kenya Cultural Festival, 3 days, having this debate around modern heritage of Africa. We have the concept note and also the budget around this festival ready. So we are yet to engage various parties. And yesterday we actually hosted some guests here at Swahiliport from Aga Khan Foundation, and they expressed interest to support this cultural festival for MoHoA, Kenya. So these are some of the pictures from the workshop. It was held in a hybrid format, with youths joining in here in person and the rest of the audience joining in virtually. So I'll get to skip the rest, but it's in the presentation. That is the team, executive team, and also this is our board. Our chair is Dr. Safia Lul, and our executive director is Mahmoud Noor. On our board, we have both governance and also this is the advisory. Yeah, in a nutshell, that is what Swahiliport, that is who we are. Very, very much proud of where we've come from and very much excited about the journey that we are headed to. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arafat, for the introduction. What we'll do is we'll run straight into the video. We can always pick up in question and answer time back and come back to you. And
all right.
Apologies for having to rush.
That's very fine.
So
right
we can the video, please.
The video. Beg your pardon, Laura, should I get to load the video?
No, our support team is doing that, I think.
All right, awesome. That's great. That's very, very fine. Yeah.
Yes, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Awesome, sir. That's very, very fine. So the name of the presenter is Fatma Twahir, but then she's held up in another meeting. So she requested me to,
thank you.
So please go on. Thank you very much.
Yes. Can you just close your screen, Arafat, please?
I don't remember the names of the team that I was with, but it was a bunch of very intelligent, soft-spoken students from Technical University of Mombasa and I think another institution. Very intelligent and contributed a lot towards please, architecture students. So they contributed softly, but they did. So this is my team. Yes. And I would welcome them to add anything in the event that I do forget, one or two things that we may have discussed.
I'm Gabriel Ngugi, fifth-year student in architecture from Technical University of Mombasa.
Machimbo Brian, Technical University of Mombasa for the year. Thank you.
Mustafa Shindo, the fifth year Technical University of Mombasa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lynette from TUM.
Hello, I'm Sami Muimi, Technical University of Mombasa, a fourth year.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm not an architect. Let me confess, me, I'm an economist, but I work at Swahiliport in research.
My name is Joshua, and I'm an intern at Swahiliport as well. Not as well, but yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, whoever feels very passionate about something I've left out, please come forward. We tried to capture the themes that were brought out by the earlier discussions. Are we looking, when we're coming up with the criteria to define modern heritage that would represent the cost, Swahili cost of the East Africa, what would we be looking at? Is it the size? Is it the typology of the building? Is it the materials? Is it the usage of that space? What about decoration? I remember Mohammed Juma mentioned something about decoration and how the intricacy of decoration indicated the importance of the person who owned the building. How is its significance now in the modern world. Then we were introduced to another concept, which was we need to also look into the process in which this architecture or these types of architecture came about, the design, the construction, the use of that space, the thought process, that whole item, the intangible component. How is it, and how do we compare it as we moved we moved through history? So using a series of pictures, we looked at different types of architecture, starting with the fact that we had a flourishing Swahili civilization before the coming of any new people, any foreigners, in quotes. So would that kind of architecture be considered modern? Then we were briefly informed about or educated about the coming of the Portuguese, the Omanis, the British, and later on what we currently have as Cosmopolitan Center. So what represents modern heritage of Mombasa, if you are to be very particular? A picture of a residential building in Old Town, having wooden balconies, carved doors, and wooden shutters for windows. That was quickly shut down as traditional. As much as it may have had modern inputs with reference to the materials of construction or the type of finish, that there was a shift from the windows being wooden to metal and glass, iron and glass, but that's traditional. Okay, now if we move towards what we were looking at, listed buildings that were done during the colonial time, there's a change in the size, in the grandeur of the buildings. If we're looking at the County Assembly building, or as Professor Abungo mentioned, the place where the Sultan reigns from, his office. It was initially a post office, ended up being an education department, environment department, and currently the office of the governor, the ruler of the town. While looking at that building, it seemed to conform to the group's definition of modern, in that it needed to have taken components of the identity of the local people. What components am I talking about? The wooden balconies, the carved doors, or the windows that looked similar to the shutter windows that were there in the old town. So this building was almost passing the test of it being modern until we discovered that it had columns, and it was shut down because of the columns. Otherwise, it seemed fine because it had carried along with it elements of the traditional. The building has a wooden balcony that was typical of the Swahili architecture. It had nice big wooden doors, and there was space, and it had arches, isn't it? But the columns shut it down. Is it worth? Is that all it takes? I don't know. I strongly support it as one of an example to indicate modern, because we were being told we need to carry along the past into the future. And what I see in the usage of space in traditional buildings, it's that the spaces seem to conform to different functions. And in my opinion, the governor's building does conform because it's taken up different functions with time as it's moved along. But of course, the columns did it. And then the thing that sort of excited everyone, now that I realize it, it could be a bias because most of my participants were from technical university. They were for the university building that was built during the Oman time. And the reason why this seemed like a good example of modern heritage representing the Swahili coast was that it had arches It had mashrabia, is there an English word for that? It's lattice work or pattern that would originally be in wood, but this time it's in masonry. It had shutter windows, wooden shutters for windows. And there was also plasterwork, isn't it? And the finishes, what do you call that? The cusps that you would find mainly in mosques. Yes, what is it called? Something like that, yes, the finish that you find at the top. So that seemed to define, or to, at least to a majority of the group members, that seemed to represent what we would consider modern, in that as much as it has used modern materials, it has retained the language of the tradition. It has carried along with it the language that we would identify with as Swahili and coastal.
Right, thank you. She came to a little bit of an abrupt halt there, but I understand that the video is done. We are struggling a little bit for time, but I understand that Fatma is here now. And I'd like to invite you, Fatma, if you want to say just a minute or so, just to wrap this up before we go on to the next presentation.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Yeah, welcome.
What has been described in the video, and what sort of the discussion we've had since that video, is that the identity of people, when it's represented in different forms and it's carried along with it in time to the modern time, even if it's even if you're using new materials to replicate the same language, as I said earlier, then it does help us to define or identify modern architecture or modern heritage to this extent. So the idea is keeping abreast with new materials, but retaining items that would identify with the local population. As much as it's changing, it should be an identity of the local people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very nice wrap up of what the video was talking to. I would like to ask if our second presenter is here, and that would be, I'm just looking for, it's Rim. Kelouaze. Is Rim here? I'm just looking at our attendees. I don't know. No, the second the presenter is not here for Expression of Liberation Movement through Modern Architecture in Africa, Afro-Brazilian and Neo-Moorish Liberation Architectures. I don't see them. So I'm going to ask Naomi, Roux and Deirdre Prins-Solani if they're ready to do the presentation on urban heritage for transformative futures. Are we good?
Yes, I think so.
See you. Very nice to see Deirdre. It's been quite a long time. We worked on Robben Island many years ago.
Yeah.
Welcome, colleagues. It looks like we might have a bit more time than we envisaged. So work towards 20 minutes and we'll be able to run a little bit over that, if that's okay with you. So I'm going to hand it straight over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the welcome, and thank you to everyone who's joined us. My name is Deirdre Prins-Solani, and I'm a heritage activist, and I'm joined by my colleague and friend and comrade, Naomi Roux, who teaches at the University of Cape Town, and who has been in conversation with me, but also in circles of various people, including spatial justice activists in the city of Cape Town. And so what we're wanting to invite you into is this conversation that we've been having with each other. And so, well, and within the circle around issues of spatial justice in the city, and whether it is equal to or not to notions of belonging and identity, and looking particularly at the relationship between living heritage as heritage that gets passed down through from generation to generation, and that is part of a dynamic process of heritage, and that is invisible and intangible, and its relationship with built heritage of the city. So I'm just going to do a very brief introduction, and then we have two questions that we pose to each other that in a way wraps up some of the conversations we've been having over a lengthy period of time, and then invite you into the conversation. So the first point that I wanted to make was that there's evidence of the urban or the mobile African in South Africa for centuries, and that these settlements and systems of governance which have been very organized in different ways and have been present within an African society. So the notion of the urban Africa, we argue, is not something that is new. It is something that has existed for a very, very long time. What we do want to recognize, which is the second point we want to flag, is that there was a disruption of the systems of organization and governance through colonial rule and in South Africa, apartheid. And these, we want to argue, are driven largely by extractive industries. So post the liberation of peoples enslaved, colonization was driven from a very strong capitalist motivation for mining, the extractive industries, and those then in turn, in order to keep the cheap labor system in place, were supported through various acts and various very systemically introduced methods, such as poll taxes, the prison system, and eventually the Land Act and the Group Areas Act. And these measures for exclusion and inclusion can still be seen in the spatial planning, for example, in the city of Cape Town, where there is a very clear distinction between what is the periphery and what is the center. So the center of the city of Cape Town and the periphery being Cape Flats extending outwards. And included in that is the creation of what we call dormitory towns, where this belonging was never permanent. It was created through colonial apartheid rule as forms of impermanence or temporality. And peripheral city dwelling has often continued this narrative of its temporary nature in the city planning, continued into the present day post-1994. So what we see in the urban landscape, therefore, is this dance between resistance, assertion of belonging in place, repression, resistance, assertion of belonging in place, repression, and so on. And it's not only through the laws and the acts, also through everything else that supported these very brutal acts, such as the pass laws, the Land Act of 1915, Separate Voters Roll, Group Areas Act, and so on. So erasure of places, fixed or permanent, is something that was always imaginations of people of color in South Africa, has always been, we argue, something that has been destabilized, and there's a threat around this notion of the possibility of being moved and movement and forced movement. It is then inevitable that the practices, the rituals, and the knowledge systems and ways of being in the world would have also changed in response to these contexts. So when we talk about living heritage within this very fraught and very fractured histories, we can then almost imagine then that the living heritage which we have present in society today has been a part of that, has contributed, has been affected by all of these shifts that happened. And so often what we find in discussions with heritage professionals is this notion that there isn't really a living heritage. If you really want to know how people lived, you've got to go to the archives, because somehow that has been documented through anthropologists or sociologists, archaeologists, and so on. And what we would like to present is that actually living heritage, because of its nature as being dynamic, has actually found its way. There are residues, there are remnants, there are there's a continuity of practice that if we would spend time investigating, we would find very far-reaching sources for it. The second point that we wanted to raise, just to flag for our question and answer, is that the disciplines of history, heritage, anthropology, architecture, and urban planning all have at their core a very limited lens. We don't want to center the colonial. Naomi and I have been having some conversations about this, which I know has been for a long, long time. But I want to assert from a colleague of ours in Te Papa, Poani Kern, who talks about the Maorification of Te Papa as opposed to decolonizing thought. And her argument is that if we pay attention to the decolonizing act or the decolonizing theory or discourse, it's going to distract us from the real of what we need to be doing, which is the indigenization of work. So moving beyond limitations of race and racism and classism, which is all held into this in the spatial instances, it's to think rather around beyond that. Let's look at a decolonization as one aspect, but let's not be distracted and look towards something else. And that something else is what we're going to speak about a little bit later. So in this conversation that we've been having, we've been saying to ourselves, is it not better to find different questions to illuminate what remains of African knowledge systems and ways of being in the world, and finding through those the potential for problem solving and dreaming a different and a new kind of imagining of urban space? And having mentioned the limitations of traditional Western scholarship, I also want to add that there is also exciting work is taking place within these various disciplines that I've mentioned. And I want to refer specifically to the work of people such as June Bam, Babawa Magokwada, and poets such as Khadija Hega, Malika Ndlovu, Debo Mashile, Tony Stewart, Sikukazi Jonas, and so on. And I mention these poets in particular because we need to be recognized, and we mustn't trap ourselves into believing that this discussion and these debates can only happen within the academy or with those of us who call ourselves heritage specialists. But these questions about heritage, memory, and spatial justice persist across and between many spaces within society. And so with that little bit of a background, I'm going to start out by asking Naomi a question. So Naomi, what are some of the limitations when the African city is seen solely through its built environment or heritage?
Cool, thanks so much, Deirdre. Thanks, and hi, everybody. Yeah, so I mean, I think this, this question about what the limitations are of a built environment approach to heritage, or an architectural approach to heritage, really kind of dovetails for me with this morning session and the presentations by Karina and Morieta, which very much spoke to this as well. So we are all kind of sitting with this idea of quote unquote heritage management in the built environment that really has its origins in, these kind of 19th century romantic with a capital R European ideas about antiquity and monumentality, the kind of the ancient monument, the romance of the ruin, and this kind of preservationist idea of heritage, these sort of buildings and objects as these kind of sacred repositories of meaning and, the marks of the past and so on. And, my sense is when we look at how this is played out in many places, but, thinking about Cape Town at the moment in particular, you can see I think very much how the echoes kind of approach kind of still keeps us in the space where the way that, you know, that heritage is approached in a kind of official way, the way that heritage is managed, is very much about the materiality. It's about the object, and it's about, you know, so what can we touch and what can we see? And I think that's true kind of in spite of, you know, the huge shifts that we've seen sort of from, you know, I guess over the last 50 years or so in heritage, where there has been this movement kind of towards the intangible, towards lived cultures and practice and the everyday and community-led processes, and kind of increasing, I think heritage is into activism in a really interesting way. And expropriation, we see it crop cultural debates, you know, and decolonization debates. But in practice, the way that these sort of management and preservation processes are implemented, I think are maybe in some ways by necessity quite stuck in the material, you know. So like we have the National Heritage in South Africa that replaced the Apartheid National Monuments Act, and even in the wording of the act, you know, you can see a shift in approach from a national monument to a national heritage resource. And so there is this kind of language in that about reframing what heritage is and what makes something significant, and what looks like in a South African post-apartheid kind of context. And so there is this, there's kind of, you know, there is the acknowledgement of social history, of living heritage, of community histories. But in practice, you know, and, you know, this is my hobby horse that I think I sort of harp on about every presentation, is the fact that the law is really good at telling you, you know, what you can break down and what size or building must be and what material you must use and what it must look like. But it's not good at managing things like meaning and belonging and nation and the things that have to do with people, you know, with actually is that gives landscapes and buildings their meaning. So I think there's a huge limitation there. And then there's also a question for me about how we navigate this idea of heritage and heritage concept in a context where we have, you know, as you've kind of summarized, we've inherited incredibly fragmented spaces, you know, fragmented cities, fragmented landscapes. And we have, you know, cities and towns and neighborhoods that so at the same time are expressions of injustice and exclusion and dispossession, but are also places of memory and belonging and generating memory and belonging, you know, and those things are true at the same time. And then these also spaces that, you know, our cities are spaces that need kind of radical spatial transformation, you know. So yeah, and I mean, so, and it's kind of not 100% clear to me how that what was the word we used earlier, the translation between these kind of universes, you know, could happen. But I do think, and based on, you know, some of our conversations and some of the work that we have been doing, that my sense is very much that the realm of the intangible and intangible heritage and living memory are the key to kind of unlocking this interface between materiality and space and memory and justice. So Deirdre, maybe on the back of that, I wonder if you can speak a little bit to this question of what marginalized and erased past, and also what present lives, because, you know, they're all connected, emerge from these conversations that we've about living heritage in urban spaces.
Thank you, Naomi. I think maybe to say that obviously this is just a snatch of the conversation that's been ongoing. Some of the work that Naomi and myself, with colleagues that are also here, but other colleagues as well in spatial justice NGOs have been working on, has been with local communities in Cape Town, And I'll just cite one example of that, give some idea of the texture of what we're working with. So just in response to your question, Naomi, it's been really powerful in terms of what's emerged from this work we've been doing here, but also from the work I've been doing on living heritage in other parts of the world and other parts of Africa as well, is that often what it does when one starts asking questions about living heritage within urban spaces and asking individuals and communities and groups what do they identify as their living heritage, and living heritage being those intangible practices and ritual ways of being in the world and crafts making and food ways and so on, asking them what of that is of value to you and why is it of value. And very often what emerges out of these conversations is that it brings to the fore the interior lives of people of color, specifically in the city of Cape Town and in South Africa, where the issue of race and racism is so overwhelming at times. And people feel that their interiority, their interior worlds have been denied for centuries. And when speaking about their living heritage, they are able to show and represent themselves as a people who live whole lives, who have many, many stories, who have ways of making meaning in the world that are beyond what is currently still the major part in the public imagination as being victim or oppressed or hero or overcomer. And if we think about the ways in which heritage has contributed to that post-1994 through the establishment of very specific museums that dealt with resistance movements, or with statues and monuments that dealt with heroes, what it does is it replicates this notion of people being seen in very stereotypical ways that don't show or demonstrate the interior and the everyday life of people, the things that people find of value, particularly people of color. So that, I think, is very important. The first one that comes to mind is what is made visible are these interior lives of people of color. The second is that it uncovers practices and rituals and ways of being in the world, some of which can be traced through the archive in being the kind of authority, but also in displacing who has the archive and who is the archive. So in a way, it disrupts this notion of the authority, and that authority is then returned to individuals and communities who can hold these things in as custodians. So there are people within our communities who are the food gardeners or the extraordinary chefs who don't make it onto television, or extraordinary bakers using food and agricultural forms that they have inherited and that has been inherited and so on. And so turning onto its head the notion of who holds the archive, and also bringing to light some of the misrepresentations that continue to exist in the collections in our museums, where material culture has been collected from communities. When people speak back into those collections and they call, the lie to what that means. And just a recent example from the National Museums of Kenya is an object that was given a value that the community of practice denied and said this was not an object of great value, but it was taken out of the country in the 18th century and it was repackaged as something of value in order to be sold at a higher cost to some museum in the north. And there are many, many examples of that, of this misrepresentation. And part of what living heritage conversations do amongst community members is to some of those wrongs that are there. But what it also shows is the residues, what remains. As a person of mixed descent in Cape Town, when I was growing up, we were told we had no culture, you have no traditions, because you are so mixed, you have no idea where you come from. And yet when one engages mixed descent around questions of living heritage, there are some very clear issues around language, around ways, around the knowledge of medicinal plants and foods, around what is beautiful and what is not. These things form part of the culture. And these conversations within marginalized communities in the city of Cape Town, present day Cape Town, has been really exciting because it brought to the surface these very real examples and stories of cultural wealth that exists, which contrary to what the community message had been through the colonial apartheid rule. What it also does is it brings to the fore ways of knowing. And this example is Constantia, but known as Constanzi, by the residents who were forcibly removed, brutally displaced, and the ways in which they mapped out the waterways of Constantia and their extensive knowledge of where the waters would flood, where there would be rivers, where there'd be streams, and the relationship that had with the gardening and the flower farms which they had before, and how that was then related to flower sellers in the city of Cape Town, in Rondebosch and other centers around the city. And that's very exciting because it brings to the present, where there's issues around climate change, around drought, and all of that, it brings a whole body of knowledge that sits outside of Western science. I think the last point that I wanted to make around this was that navigating the everyday is where the living heritage rests. And when we begin to see the ways in which urban spaces are designed, mostly by planners and architects, when we introduce living heritage into that conversation, we are forced to think about the ways in which those spaces are inhabited, how they are informed through use, and the kind of imaginations of people. And so answers for new ways of doing things and for thinking around social justice issues cannot be found exclusively in the domains of the tangible, because the imagination is partly where this liberation can take place. And so that makes placemaking an iterative process, collaborative, and very, very messy, which only in terms of the act and the law and the restrictions, as Marietta explained again this morning, it makes it a very, very difficult issue where living heritage is not to be managed. Unlike built heritage, living heritage is meant to be enabled so that it can continue into perpetuity. Naomi, let's come to the question of social justice.
Sorry to interrupt you, Deirdre.
Yeah.
Can we allow just 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
We're nearly done.
Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks, Deirdre. Yeah, the million-dollar question, spatial justice, a relationship with heritage and also with living heritage. So, I mean, I love this term that you used, of cultural wealth. I think that's such a useful idea to sort of bring into this conversation, right? Partly in the sense that, you know, I think even in the book on spatial justice, Ed Soja says that it's, I think it's the Ed Soja book where he says that, you know, it's actually very difficult to define spatial justice by its presence, but it's very obvious when it's absent. Like we can define it through its absence, you know. So, and I think that's partly because, you know, spatial justice is not only about the material. It's not, you know, it is about the material. You know, I'm not discounting that at all. You know, it's about, you know, kind of how does the physical space that you live in or the geographies of the city impact on what possibly foreclosed or what's available to you as a person or to you as a community or as a, you know, a family or but it's also related, I think, to these very intangible things around belonging and access and, you know, and memory, presence of memory, the erasure of memory, you know, plus then the complication of living in this fragmented kind of urban space that we live in. So, I mean, maybe one way to sort of to think about the question is to look at it through the lens of struggles around gentrification in Cape Town. And of course, these can be extrapolated to a lot of other spaces as well. But so I'm thinking of, you know, this sort of a recent-ish case in Salt River where there's a very active sort of activist heritage society that is very much about, you know, and Salt River is a kind of, it was the sort of historic textile hub of the city, very strong working class history, you know, so it's kind of built fabric is these, you know, it's modernist sort of factories, and it's also kind of fine-grained Victorian residential sort of row housing and semi-detached housing, right? And so there was a case, I think about a year ago, I've lost my sense of time completely, where there was a proposal to develop this little block of Victorian shop fronts into a kind of 8 or 10-story apartment and office block. And the Salt River Heritage Society had just gotten themselves registered as like the official conservation body in the area that had to be consulted. And this was the sort of first case that they were contesting through these official channels. And, you know, the architects had sort of, you know, so they'd, you know, been very kind of conscious of preserving the Victorian shop fronts and setting back the, you know, the added height and putting the bulk at the back where you can't really see it, and kind of going, oh, well, there you go, the heritage is protected and it will still function as a shop front. So the social function is maintained, and, you know, we're just putting this stuff on top, keeping with policies around densification, which is at its core supposed to be a spatial justice strategy, although of course it's not always in practice. And so there was suddenly this contestation that was not about the Victorian shop fronts at all, and that was not even really about that site at all, but that was about anxieties about gentrification, development, you know, who has access to the space, who owns the space, who is shaping the suburb, what happens to the generational memory of this place. You know, how is the environment and the sense of place and the sense of belonging being altered in these really radical ways that, you know, that residents who feel very deeply rooted in that place suddenly are kind of losing control of, you know. And, you know, for me and for many activists, that is fundamentally a justice issue that is related to heritage, but it's not related to the heritage of the Victorian shop fronts, you know, which are the materiality and the visuality is important, but it's actually it's a manifestation of a much bigger set of struggles and anxieties and resistances. You know, but again, there's, you know, there isn't really space sort of in your, you know, conservation body comments to Heritage Western Cape, there isn't really space to say, well, this is a manifestation of exclusionary gentrification and economic displacement, unless you can link that argument very specifically to that specific place, you know, and the boundaries of that place on the map, which isn't always really possible, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's a question about what is actually at stake, and it's, you know, it is about the built environment, but it's about the built environment insofar as the built environment speaks to community, belonging, collective memory, generational memory, plus in this like really complicated context of historical displacement and marginalization. So I think that doesn't answer the question, but sort of opens up more questions. But so Deirdre, I think maybe just in the last sort of minute before it kicks us off, if you want to just conclude with a little bit of a comment around this idea of and sense of place, these ideas that are so fundamental to urban space, how we experience it and how we can navigate those through this lens of living.
Thanks, Naomi. I think that I'm just going to keep it very short, perhaps to reiterate it as a question. So what does belonging and identity mean in the heritage of the modern city of Africa? And how does living heritage help to provide a different lens, a new kind of lens, to look at the lives of people in the everyday as the city is navigated? I think that's where I'm going to leave it as a question. And yeah, thank you so much, Laura, for your patience with us.
Thank you.
Back to you.
No, thank you both very much for a very stimulating conversation. I think it touches on a whole lot of issues that many of us are grapple with in probably not very effective ways, but it's important. And they're not easy discussions either. They can be hard and painful on all sides. And I loved that last question, Deirdre, that what does belonging and identity mean in the modern heritage of Africa, particularly in an urban environment? I that's something that this conference can take forward into further deliberations because it's so relevant. Yes. So, colleagues, we've come to the end. Unfortunately, our one speaker is not present. It would have been really very interesting to hear about Latin America, or Afro-Brazilian, it's not Latin America, and Neo-Moorish liberation architecture, but there's obviously been a problem with the presenter not being able to attend. So we have about 10 minutes or so for questions and discussion. I want to thank both the Swahiliport presenters as well as Naomi and Deirdre for a really good session. I find these are so enjoyable, and there's so many really great ideas coming out. It's fabulous for us. So colleagues on the floor, I will open it up to any questions, any points of clarity, any comments or remarks that you may have for our four presenters, actually. I think everybody's kind of
can't find my hand, that's why.
Oh, okay. Yeah, your hand, yeah, it's under reactions, and then you have to, then there's a little thing that says raise hands, but don't worry, Marietta, please go ahead.
Hello, I'll put my hand down.
No, okay. Well, I will make a comment that having heard your presentation this morning, I think these two dovetailed really well.
Oh, that's great.
So I understand that Naomi is one of your advisors for WAS. So, I mean, that's understandable, but I think it adds a huge amount of value to the debate.
Thanks.
Using a specific example, sorry, and then a more theoretical approach that underpins.
So for me, it's for me, I'm trying as a practitioner. So all this debate is raging outside of the systems of governance, local government, provincial, and national. And I think my frustration, I want to know what your thoughts are on representation within the system. So where does myself as a Black woman in practitioner find my belonging place with my own heritage and my own story within the system of governance? And to also challenge a system of patriarchy, which is so entrenched, and how that impacts as a feminist and feminist practices if all decision makers are white men in this area of heritage. Like, how does one even challenge that?
Yeah,
where do we find our belonging?
I'm not quite sure who you're putting that to. I'm going to answer that.
To the universe.
To the universe. But I mean, there are a couple of us women fighting the good fight out there. But I think many of
I know, Laura. Yes, it's like dominant voices aren't always.
It's quite a challenge. So let's throw it out there, see if anybody wants to respond to that. Deirdre or Naomi, do you want to respond to it in particular? I don't see any hands coming up from our colleagues.
So, I mean, Marietta, I know we have talked about this a lot as well, and I mean, I don't really have a response for you, having not had to navigate, what it means to kind of, and because I think you're in a very interesting position in that you are an activist and you are also in management and practice, which, as you know, is a very complicated and fraught space to be. I think I just wanted to say that, your question has also sort of sparked something for me, which is that I think we also often forget, we talk about government and governance and the systems and the official practice as if it's a kind of, monolithic thing that just is. It's not, because it's also inhabited by people. It's kind of like when we talk about the state. Well, what is the state? The state is power and structural power, but it's also people with their own stuff, right? So I don't have an answer for you, but I guess I just wanted to say thanks for also reminding us that, these boundaries are not the boundaries are blurred at times as well. And yeah.
So yeah, so just to add, since we're having like a debating conversation, it is about belonging also within the system.
And the system making space
yeah.
for that belonging, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, and again, I think there's a kind of history of heritage management that is about white men, and that is about colonial heritage, and that is about architecture built by great men. You know, it's that kind of, I mean, that's the history of the discipline that we are sitting with. We have to counter in some way. Yeah, Deirdre, I saw you unmuting briefly.
Yes. I didn't want to do this too much because I think, Marietta, we can talk about this forever. But I wanted to say that I think one of the things which over the last 10 years or so that I've been working in the field of living heritage has been the fact that it's not often that I only work with heritage professionals or heritage specialists or culture departments. With the work of living heritage, because it traverses so many different areas of life, health and agriculture and the work has often happened with people outside of that. And I think that's part of the challenge that change makers have. I'm not wanting to put you on the spot, but it's also recognizing where are the allies and where do the allies sit, how to work with the allies in getting the heritage agenda understood firstly, because I know that's something over the last couple of years in Cape Town has been quite some things to work with the social justice, spatial justice activists, understanding that heritage does matter in the debates on social housing, etc., etc. And that's, we still got a way to go in doing that. But I think it is about recognizing where the allies exist, because I can think that it's a lonely, hard place to be within a system that is overwhelmingly vast. And so I think it's recognizing that and looking at where the allies. I think there's lots and lots of other strategies which I'm sure over time will also begin to emerge as we kind of work our way through a very foggy domain around.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, gentrification and gentrification.
Yeah, I love that.
I think just to wrap up, it's really the job of people like us coming out of these fora that need to start pushing this message very hard. It's not an easy message to put forward. And also speaking from experience and observing the authorities in action, as it were, there's a real fear of going against the letter of the law, which particularly now is becoming very challenging. I mean, there's legal challenges. That's another issue. But what I'm finding encouraging in the work that, for instance, this forum's doing and other broader initiatives is the increasing understanding that there are other factors apart from just architecture, planning, archaeology, etc., that are intrinsic to heritage. We're looking at the natural environment as an intrinsic part of cultural heritage. We're looking at human rights for heritage. We're looking at climate change, SDGs, which are thrown around all over the time. But at least there's a window that is starting to open that makes it more inclusive and broad. So one wants to spread a positive message. I've used my chair's prerogative to end this session. Are about to convene at 3, and probably we just need a minute to take a breath. After, thank you, a really great session. So thank you all once again. I really listening to the presentations. We are going to start again at 3 with report backs. So take a few minutes and then we'll rejoin the plenary. And thank you all once again. Thanks.
Cool, thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. And thank you, colleagues who joined us.